Hi, I'm Seraphina. I'm 30 years old. 3 weeks ago, I handed my mom a beautiful jewelry box for her birthday with a smile on my face and a tracker hidden inside. By the time I checked what she threw away the next morning, I was holding evidence that would destroy 3 marriages, expose a decade-long scam, and send 2 people to prison. My own mother tried to have me committed to a mental hospital. My stepfather threatened my life, and my half-sister? She tried to steal my identity. What time are you watching this? Are you in your car, your bedroom, maybe hiding in the bathroom at work? Drop a comment below because I read every single one, and I want to know who's listening while I finally tell the story that nearly got me killed. You're probably wondering how a simple birthday gift turned into a federal investigation. How someone you trusted your whole life could look you in the eye and lie while planning to erase you completely. They thought I was the naive daughter who would never question anything, the one who'd keep sending money, keep believing their stories, keep pretending everything was normal, while they slowly destroyed my life from the inside out. But here's what they didn't know. I'm not just Seraphina, the trusting daughter, anymore. I'm Seraphina, the woman who learned to fight back. And when you mess with someone's entire existence, when you steal their identity, their money, and try to convince the world they're crazy, well, that's when you discover what someone is really capable of. So, let me take you back to where this all started. Not 3 weeks ago with the tracker. That was just the final move. This started 2 years ago in my small apartment in Millbrook Heights when I began noticing the small things that didn't add up, the things that made me question everything I thought I knew about my family. My mother, Evangeline Thorne, lived in what everyone called the crown jewel of Willowbrook Estates, a sprawling colonial mansion with marble columns and perfectly manicured gardens that looked like something out of a magazine. She'd been married to my stepfather, Montgomery Blackwell, for 12 years. He was a successful investment advisor who drove a Tesla Model S and wore suits that cost more than most people's rent. My half-sister, Cordelia, was 26 and supposedly worked as a lifestyle consultant, whatever that meant. She lived in a downtown loft that she claimed she paid for with her business income. But here's the thing about perfect families living in perfect houses with perfect lives. Sometimes the perfection is just expensive wallpaper covering up rot. I lived 45 minutes away in a modest one-bedroom apartment above Rossetti's Italian Bakery on Maple Street in Millbrook Heights. The smell of fresh bread wafted up through my floorboards every morning, and Mrs. Rossetti always slipped me day-old cannoli when I came downstairs to get my mail. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, mostly creating logos and websites for small businesses in the area. I made enough to pay my rent, keep gas in my Honda Civic, and occasionally treat myself to dinner at Giuseppe's Pizza down the street. The contrast between my life and theirs always felt intentional, like they lived in their golden bubble while I scratched by in the real world. But I told myself that was okay. I was independent, I was making my own way, I wasn't asking anyone for handouts. Except I was still sending them money. Not a lot by their standards, but for me, $200 a month was groceries, it was utilities. It was the difference between having coffee at home versus buying it from Starbucks. But Evangeline always had a reason she needed it. Montgomery's investment portfolio was restructuring. Cordelia needed help with her business expenses. There was always something. The first crack in my perfect family facade appeared on a rainy Tuesday in October, 2 years ago. I was working on a logo design for Henderson's hardware store when my phone buzzed with a text from Evangeline. "Sarah, darling, could you swing by this afternoon? I have some exciting news to share with you about the family vacation we're planning." Family vacation. In 12 years of marriage to Montgomery, Evangeline had never once included me in a family vacation. Cordelia and I barely spoke except for awkward exchanges at Christmas dinner. But something in me always hoped that maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time I'd finally be part of their inner circle. So I closed my laptop, put on my best cardigan, the navy blue one that didn't have any stains on it, and drove to Willowbrook Estates. The Blackwell mansion sat on 2 acres of perfectly maintained lawn.
The circular driveway was paved with actual cobblestones, and the front door was one of those heavy oak things with brass fixtures that probably cost more than my annual rent. I always felt underdressed walking up to that door, like I should have worn designer clothes or at least shoes that weren't from Target. Evangeline answered wearing cream-colored cashmere and pearls, looking like she'd stepped out of a catalog for expensive retirement communities. Her hair was perfectly styled in that way that only happens when you have a standing appointment at Bella Corte Salon every week. "Sarah, come in, sweetheart," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. Well, you look like you've been working hard." Translation: you look tired and your clothes are cheap.
The foyer was all marble and crystal chandeliers, the kind of space designed to make visitors feel small. Family photos lined the walls in expensive frames, Evangeline and Montgomery at charity galas, Cordelia at her college graduation, vacation photos from places I couldn't afford to visit. There were a few pictures that included me, but they were smaller, tucked into corners like afterthoughts. "Come into the living room," Evangeline said, leading me past the grand staircase with its mahogany banister. "Montgomery and Cordelia are waiting." The living room was a study in understated wealth. Persian rugs, antique furniture, original artwork that I recognized from my art history classes. Montgomery sat in a leather wingback chair, scrolling through his iPhone with the focused attention of someone managing very important business. He looked up when we entered, flashing that practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Seraphina," he said, standing to give me one of those brief shoulder-pat hugs that rich men give people they consider beneath them. "Good to see you. How's the graphic design business?" He always said it like that, like my profession was some kind of hobby I'd grow out of eventually. "It's going well," I replied, settling onto the cream-colored sofa that probably cost more than my car. Mrs. Chen hired me to redesign the website for her restaurant, and I just finished a branding package for the new yoga studio on Elm Street. "That's nice," Montgomery said, but I could tell he'd already stopped listening. Cordelia emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of coffee and delicate china cups. She moved with the kind of grace that comes from years of cotillion classes and finishing school. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves, and her makeup looked like it had been professionally applied. She wore a silk blouse and tailored pants that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Sister," she said, setting the tray on the coffee table. The word always sounded forced when she said it, like she was reminding herself that we were technically related. "Cordelia," I replied, accepting the coffee cup she handed me. The china was so thin I was afraid I'd break it just by holding it. "So," Evangeline said, settling into her own chair and folding her hands in her lap, "I wanted to tell you about our plans for the holidays. We've decided to take a family trip to Aspen for Christmas this year. The Weatherbys have a lovely cabin they're letting us use, and we thought it would be wonderful to have some real family time together." My heart did that stupid little jump it always did when they included me in something. "That sounds amazing," I said. "I've never been to Aspen. When are we talking about going?" There was a pause. A brief, barely noticeable pause that somehow felt like a chasm opening up in the room. "Well," Evangeline said, her voice taking on that careful tone she used when she was about to deliver bad news gently. "The cabin only sleeps 6 people, and with Montgomery's mother joining us and Cordelia bringing Marcus was Cordelia's boyfriend, a trust fund baby who worked in private equity and had never worn the same shirt twice in the 3 years I'd known him." "Oh," I said, understanding immediately. "Of course, that makes sense. But we were hoping," Montgomery jumped in, "that you might be able to help us out with some of the expenses. The cabin rental is quite steep even with the Weatherby discount, and there are the lift tickets, the equipment rentals." And there it was, the real reason for this meeting, not to include me in their family vacation, but to ask me to help pay for their family vacation that I wasn't invited to. "We were thinking maybe $500? Evangeline said, her voice bright and cheerful like she was asking me to pass the salt. I sat there, holding my delicate china cup, feeling like the world's biggest fool. $500. That was more than 2 months of the money I usually sent them. That was my emergency fund. That was my safety net. But looking at their expectant faces, Evangeline's hopeful smile, Montgomery's polite interest, and Cordelia's carefully neutral expression, I felt that familiar weight of obligation. These were my family. This was what families did for each other, right? They helped each other out.
Sure, I heard myself saying, I can probably swing that. Oh, wonderful! Evangeline clapped her hands together. You're such a dear. We'll make sure to get you something lovely from the trip. They spent the next 20 minutes showing me pictures of the Aspen cabin on Cordelia's iPad, talking about the restaurants they wanted to try and the ski lessons they were planning. I smiled and nodded and made appropriate comments while internally calculating how many ramen noodle dinners $500 represented. When I finally left that afternoon, driving my Honda Civic out of their cobblestone driveway and back to my apartment above the bakery, something felt different. Not broken exactly, but cracked. Like when you drop a glass and it doesn't shatter completely, but develops those hairline fractures that spread slowly until the whole thing eventually falls apart.
I told myself I was being dramatic. Families help each other out. That's what love looks like sometimes. Sacrifice, giving even when it's hard. But as I sat in my apartment that night, eating leftover pizza and working on a website for Martinez Auto Repair, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about that entire afternoon had been off. It was the way Montgomery had said graphic design business, like it was playing dress up. The way Cordelia had called me sister, like she was reading from a script. The way Evangeline had asked for $500 with the same casual tone she might use to ask someone to turn up the thermostat. But most of all, it was the realization that they had planned an entire family vacation down to the sleeping arrangements and ski lessons without ever considering including me. I wasn't family to them. I was a bank account with legs. That night, I made my first real mistake in what would become a 2-year investigation into my own family. I decided to pay attention. I started small. When Evangeline called the next week asking for an extra $100 because Montgomery's car needed unexpected repairs, I didn't just transfer the money like usual. Instead, I drove past their house the next day and saw Montgomery's Tesla sitting in the driveway looking as pristine as ever. No repair shop, no loaner car, nothing that suggested expensive automotive work. When Cordelia posted Instagram photos from her business trip to Miami the following month, the same month she'd asked me for $200 to help with business expenses, I noticed that all her photos were taken at South Beach clubs and expensive restaurants, not exactly the working vacation she'd described. I started screenshotting things, saving text messages, keeping a notebook where I wrote down the dates they asked for money and the reasons they gave. At first, I told myself I was just being more organized about my finances, but deep down, I knew I was building a case. The problem with starting to pay attention to liars is that once you see the patterns, you can't unsee them. And the patterns were everywhere. Evangeline's charity work that required expensive new outfits for every event, but I could never find her name listed as a volunteer with any of the organizations she claimed to support. Montgomery's investment restructuring that had supposedly been going on for 3 years, but their lifestyle never seemed to reflect any financial strain. Cordelia's lifestyle consulting business that apparently generated enough income for a downtown loft, but had no website, no social media presence, and no clients I could identify. By Christmas, the Christmas they spent in Aspen with my $500 while I worked overtime to afford presents for my coworkers' kids, I had filled an entire notebook with inconsistencies, lies, and financial requests that didn't add up. But I still didn't understand the bigger picture. I still thought I was dealing with garden variety family dysfunction, not criminal conspiracy. That changed on Valentine's Day. I was having coffee with my neighbor, Mrs. Rossetti, in the bakery downstairs. She was showing me pictures of her grandson's wedding when she casually mentioned that she'd seen my name in the newspaper. The newspaper? I asked, confused. The business section of the Millbrook Herald, she said, pulling out her reading glasses. Something about a real estate investment company. I saved the article because I thought you'd want to see it. She handed me a newspaper clipping, and there it was. A small article about Seraphina Holdings, LLC, a real estate investment company that had just purchased a strip mall on the other side of town.
According to the article, the company was owned and operated by Seraphina Thorne of Willowbrook Estates. Seraphina Thorne, my name, my first name, and my mother's maiden name. But I had never heard of Seraphina Holdings, LLC. I had never purchased a strip mall. I had never lived in Willowbrook Estates. I stared at that newspaper clipping until the words started to blur together. Mrs. Rossetti was still talking about her grandson's wedding, but I couldn't hear her anymore. All I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat and the distant ringing of alarm bells in my head. Someone was using my name to buy real estate. Someone who lived in the same neighborhood as my mother and stepmother. Someone who had access to enough information about me to create what appeared to be a legitimate business entity. That night, I made my first real mistake in what would become a 2-year investigation into my own family. I decided to pay attention. His name was Detective Ray Castellanos, and he was a retired police officer who now ran a small private investigation firm out of an office above Peppino's Deli on Main Street. I'd found him through a Google search at 2 in the morning, fueled by panic and too much coffee. "Miss Thorne," he said when I met with him the next morning, reviewing the newspaper clipping and the notebook of inconsistencies I'd been keeping. "This looks like identity theft. Sophisticated identity theft. Someone has been using your personal information to establish credit, open business accounts, probably more. But who would do that?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Ray looked at me with the kind of gentle expression that cops use when they're about to deliver bad news. In cases like this, it's usually someone close to the victim, someone who has access to personal documents, social security numbers, financial information, someone who knows your habits well enough to stay under your radar. Family members, he meant. He was talking about family members. "What should I do?" I asked.
First, we run a complete credit check and background search, see how deep this goes. Then we start gathering evidence, real evidence, not just suspicions and inconsistencies. He tapped my notebook. "This is a good start, but we need documents, financial records, proof of fraud." "How do we get that?" Ray smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. "We get creative." Over the next 6 months, Ray taught me things I never thought I'd need to know. How to run background checks, how to trace financial records through public databases, how to identify shell companies and fake business entities, how to document evidence in a way that would hold up in court. What we found was worse than I'd imagined. Seraphina Holdings, LLC was just the beginning. There was also Seraphina Enterprises, Seraphina Property Management, and Seraphina Investment Group, all using variations of my name, all listing addresses in Willowbrook Estates or the surrounding area, all involved in real estate transactions, business loans, and investment schemes that I knew nothing about. But here's where it got really ugly. Someone had been using my social security number and personal information to establish credit in my name, then using that credit to fund these fake businesses. When the businesses defaulted on loans or failed to pay taxes, the liability came back to me. I wasn't just a victim of identity theft. I was being set up to take the fall for what appeared to be a massive financial fraud scheme. "Your credit is destroyed," Ray told me during one of our meetings in July. "You've got liens, judgments, outstanding debts in 6 figures. On paper, you look like a deadbeat who's been running scams for years." "But I don't understand," I said, staring at the pile of documents spread across his desk. "Why would they do this to me? I've been giving them money. I've been helping them." Ray leaned back in his chair and gave me that look again, the cop look, the one that said he'd seen this kind of thing before and it never ended well. "Because you were perfect for it," he said simply. "Think about it. You live alone, you work from home, you don't have a lot of close friends or a boyfriend who might notice inconsistencies. You've been financially supporting them for years, so they know your income, your spending habits, your banking information, and most importantly, you trust them. You wouldn't think to check your credit report or question financial documents if they came from family." The room felt like it was tilting sideways.
So this has been planned for years? I think this started small, maybe just using your information to get a better rate on a loan or qualify for a credit card. But once they saw how easy it was and how unlikely you were to catch on, it escalated. I thought about all the times I'd given Evangeline my social security number for family insurance policies and investment opportunities, all the times Montgomery had offered to help me with my taxes and needed copies of my financial documents, all the times Cordelia had borrowed my credit card for emergencies and promised to pay me back. They hadn't just been taking my monthly payments, they'd been stealing my entire identity, piece by piece, transaction by transaction, for years. What's the end game here? I asked. What happens when this all falls apart? Ray gathered up the documents and slipped them back into the manila folder. You go to prison for fraud while they disappear with the money, or they file for bankruptcy in your name and stick you with the debts while they start over somewhere else. Either way, they win and you lose everything. That night, I sat in my apartment above the bakery, surrounded by evidence of my family's betrayal, and realized that I had a choice to make. I could confront them directly, give them a chance to explain, maybe try to work something out as a family. Or I could do what Ray suggested. I could go underground, gather more evidence, and build a case strong enough to put them in prison where they belonged. The old Seraphina, the trusting daughter who believed that family was everything, would have chosen confrontation. She would have driven to Willowbrook Estates, knocked on their door, and asked for an explanation while secretly hoping there was some innocent misunderstanding. But the new Seraphina, the woman who had spent 6 months learning about financial fraud and identity theft, understood that confrontation would just give them time to cover their tracks and disappear. So I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to destroy them the same way they'd been destroying me. Slowly, carefully, and completely. I just needed the right moment, the right opportunity, the right trap. That opportunity came 3 months later when Evangeline called to tell me about her 60th birthday party. I want it to be special, you understand. Just family, intimate, meaningful. And that's when I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to give her a gift she'd never forget. A beautiful jewelry box with a tracker hidden inside, so I could finally see what they did when they thought no one was watching. What I found in that trash can 3 weeks ago wasn't just evidence of their crimes. It was proof of something so much worse that it still makes my hands shake when I think about it. They weren't just stealing my identity. They were planning to kill me.
The tracker led me to a dumpster behind Moretti's restaurant at 3 a.m. What I found wasn't just financial documents, it was a life insurance policy in my name for $2 million with Evangeline as the sole beneficiary, dated just 6 months ago. But that wasn't the worst part. Underneath were medical records from Riverside Psychiatric Hospital recommending my immediate involuntary commitment due to severe delusional episodes and self-harm tendencies. Records I'd never seen, symptoms I'd never had, a doctor's signature I didn't recognize. The final document made my blood freeze. A death certificate template with my name already typed in. Cause of death, suicide during psychiatric episode. They weren't just planning to steal my identity, they were planning to erase me completely, collect $2 million, and make it look like I'd killed myself in a mental institution. The tracker saved my life. Within hours, FBI agents raided their mansion. They found offshore accounts, forged documents, and recorded conversations planning my accident. Montgomery got 15 years, Evangeline got 12. Cordelia flipped on them both and got 5. I got my life back. If someone you trust is asking too many questions about your finances, trust your instincts. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones planning to destroy you. Drop a comment if this story resonated with you.
you're not alone.